to me, the reason why I wrote the book is to be able to have conversations like this, right? I mean, we should be able to use a medical term, right? Should be able
Yeah,
to talk about it, and it should be censored like that. That's crazy in and of itself. That you have to think
100%.
about what word you have to
Yes.
use, right?
It's crazy that
And
YouTube is getting involved in censoring this as well. But
yeah, and I
uh,
mean, thankfully, it's not as censored anymore. I would say a year ago, half a year ago, it was much worse than it is now. I don't know that I've been censored for
mhm,
using the word in a while now, which is good. YouTube was kind of last, but it seems like they're even getting better. But
yeah,
Instagram, social media, thus far since the book came out, has been great. And I thought when I was writing the book, like I could lose my license, I wouldn't be able to get anything out there, and it has been very different, which is really nice. That we can have more conversations about it, but it's still super frustrating conversation. But to answer your question, so I guess going back, I did all the regular medical training. I trained at a great program, one of the top programs in America for pediatrics, and I really didn't think much about vaccines, jabs at that time. I really didn't think anything other than what you're taught, which is very minimal. It's kind of these are the things that you use, and we had these horrible diseases, and we don't have them anymore, and they work great, and here's your schedule. Good luck to you, and that's
right.
really what kind of my training was, and I didn't really think much more about it. But I did at that time during training meet my now wife, and she's very holistic minded, and so it did open up my eyes to a little bit of a different perspective and a little different world, and I started doing some functional medicine and integrative training, and it was really interesting because from a medical perspective, you're kind of taught that all that stuff is woo woo and out there, and then you go and you start learning about it, and you're like, wait, what? This is all really interesting. This is super useful. Like, what's woo woo about learning about nutrition or exercise or sleep or preventative care? Like, nothing was woo woo about it. Obviously, there are some things that are woo woo and out there if you go like way out there, but mostly integrative medicine is very reasonable and very useful. And so I was really interested in it, and I started practicing in that way. But what you realize really quickly as you get into and you create an integrated practice is people have a lot of questions about jabs, and didn't know the answers to a lot of the questions, or I was getting really interesting questions that I wanted to learn more about. So I was kind of forced to learn a lot more about it, and that's kind of what the path was over the last decade. And then COVID happened, and I got super frustrated with the messaging and the kind of propaganda and everything, and I just decided that I think I do need to really talk about this, regardless, because I just don't think the censorship is right.
Right.
And I thought that if I was going to talk about it, I needed to be as educated as possible. So it's really why I took a super deep dive into this whole topic, and tried to learn as much as possible. Because obviously, if I'm going to talk about it, it's super controversial, and I needed to be as educated as possible.
Hmm.
And
Mhm,
also, the things like you mentioned that are out there are pretty one sided, like super pro,
Hmm.
super against, and I didn't like that either. I really wanted to try to get a balanced approach, and I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything. I just want to kind of present data, have discussions, and help things move forward. And so that's why I think it's useful to be able to have these conversations, because I don't think most people come at it from that perspective.
so something that would maybe help us also understand maybe your decision on this, because it seems like you try to stay in neutral possibly, but maybe something that would give us a bit more understanding would be, if for your children, would you give them the vaccine or not?
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I get the question a lot. I don't talk about my own kids just because I feel like it's not fair for them to kind of give their medical history for everyone. But I'd say in the
Hmm.
office, I don't, I believe in informed consent. I don't believe in forcing anybody to do anything.
Right.
We have people in our office that do the regular CDC schedule. We have people that do a slow schedule, and some people that don't do it. We have conversations, and I try to help parents make the best decision
Hmm.
for them, and that's what I
Yeah.
feel like we should be doing. That's what we do with everything else in medicine, but I don't force anybody to do anything. So we do all the above. That's the way I discuss things in the book. That's the way I discuss things online, because that's what I feel is my job. Like with anything else, if you're an oncologist, you're not forcing someone to get chemo. You're explaining them the risks and the benefits, and they can choose what they
Hmm.
think it's right for them. So that's the way that I practice, and that's kind of my general mentality on shots, is that it should be up to each person to weigh the risks and the benefits for
But
themselves.
Dr. Gator, just a bit of pushback on that because I think this is a very complicated topic. And we've done many podcasts on this topic, and I'm still very confused on it. And you've done a lot of research on it, and there's still so many questions out there. So, what makes you think that a parent that's super busy with all their lives and has a lot of responsibility will be able to do the research needed in order to make such a big decision I mean, they're not doctors; they're just parents. So I understand the informed consent aspect, but how informed of a decision can you make as a parent?
Well, I think you can be as informed as you would like to be. I mean, it's totally reasonable. It's like, not everyone has a PhD and all this stuff, but I mean, neither did I, right? And I think
Mm.
if it's important to you, then you can learn as much as you can and be as informed as you can. I mean, you don't necessarily have to be a vaccinologist, but you can dive into the information to whatever level is reasonable for you to be as informed as possible. And you asked a good question before, like, why should somebody trust me over the CDC? They shouldn't necessarily trust me over the CDC. I never tell people that. I think it's really arrogant to say, oh, Dr. Joel knows more than the CDC. You should follow my schedule versus their schedule. Like, I don't think that makes sense. There's a lot of people that have worked on this for a long time. What I do think is if you want to default to, the regular, what's recommended, then the CDC schedule is the CDC schedule. That's what's recommended, and that's what you could do. But if you want to do anything else outside of that, like a slow schedule or not do jabs, then I think it does make sense for you to do as much reading and research as you can, and
Right.
and try to understand the topic. So at least you can ask educated questions of your provider, or understand the arguments. And that is what I tried to do with my book, right? I tried to give a balanced approach. I tried to kind of go through the big issues that parents have, but ultimately I think it's important to read multiple sources, and at the end of the day, like, I think if you want to be at least somewhat educated, you can't just read a pro-vaccine book. Like, you can't just read something about the CDC. You got to read something else, and
Right.
then at least you have some sort of understanding of the landscape and why people think that way, and then you can make a decision from there. And it could still be to do them all. That might be your choice, but you should at least have an understanding of why some people have concerns.
100%. Um, Something I want to put a bit of context to, like, our from the information that we know. So we've interviewed Dr. Andrew Wakefield about, and like, from, I'm gonna say it from my perspective, so I don't, like, say that this is his opinion or anything like that. This is just from what I understood with our conversation with him. But it sounded like the anti-vax movement is a bit of a misconstrued idea of what he was originally trying to present in his study, and then it just kind of blew up in the US and became this crazy movement, way after even his study came out. And I mean, after that, I don't know like, I'm not, the details are just kind of like a bit jumbled up, but it sounds like this anti-vax movement isn't even necessarily focused on the vax. It's not based on, like, the exact things that he was trying to present in the first place. It just became a bit, like, jumbled up, and mixed a lot of misinformation in it. Is that is that safe to say, or, like, what's going on
Yeah,
with it?
yeah. I think, I mean, the whole term doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like, most people that are called anti-vax are not against the concept of vaccines. They don't necessarily believe the dominant narrative, or that they're totally safe, or that they've been studied in the way that they feel like they should be studied, or the best
Right.
possible research. And so they're pushing back and then kind of labeled that because it's easy to label you as an anti-vaxxer. But a lot of times it doesn't even make sense. Like, you have a parent who comes in who gives their kid shots, and then their kid has a really bad reaction. They don't want to do it anymore. They start talking about it, and they're labeled as an anti-vaxxer. And that doesn't make, like, literally any sense. It was literally a parent who went in to get shots, and
Yeah.
and they they're not against it. They just feel like they cause an issue for them. So I think it's a big problem, and that's something that's just been used to kind of dismiss people. Where
Right. Yeah.
I think a lot of it is really just more, when you do the research and you do look into what's been done, how the research was done, what information we do have, and what's missing. I think that sparks a lot of questions for educated individuals or uneducated individuals, where you're like, wait, like, what? Like, that's what was studied? That's how it was done? That's how many participants? This is the placebo? Like, you start to look at things, and you can't turn away from that. And that doesn't mean, at least for me, like, it doesn't mean that there isn't some benefit. It's just I personally don't think we understand the risks, and we've never really studied them appropriately. And I think
Mhm.
those are the kinds of things that we need to be able to make an educated decision, a fully educated decision about risk versus the benefits. Like, you can't know what your risk is unless you study it appropriately. And I don't think we've done that yet.
True. Uh, Sorry. The whole thing. The whole time I was also thinking about when we were discussing this. Um, I was going back to an experience I recently had where I was sharing an opinion, and then I just got labeled as performative. And like, this was just me thinking about how, people get labeled, what's it called, anti-vax. They just get labeled as something just because they disagree with someone's opinion. Or uh, is that is that something like, you feel like maybe the CDC does, or big pharma does, to independent researchers or independent doctors who try to, you know maybe share a narrative that isn't exactly uh, the same narrative as theirs? Is that how it goes?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, I know it got a lot worse in the last few years. I think at first that there were kind of, two worlds of anti-vaxxers, like somebody who's completely against all vaccines and they think they're the worst thing in the world. That's kind of one extreme, but I don't think that's very many people. I think most of it is just
Mhm.
people that are either more hesitant or have questions or did some research on it, or just are not going in the same direction as the mainstream, like you said, and so they get put under that category. And I think a large part of it is that there's such a push to do jabs, to do shots, and there's such a financial incentive to do them that there's always a pushback on anybody that does research or discusses things in a different way, and that really, culminated with COVID, where everybody just got shut down for even having an opinion, even when those opinions were correct, uh, and you just weren't able to have a discussion. So I think that it morphed into something that's a lot more than it really was, and now I think is the first time where you're seeing some pushback where people are allowed to ask questions again, and you're not necessarily labeled as a crazy kook for asking a
Yeah.
question when really you just have a good question and it's reasonable.
So you mentioned, sorry, Ali, I just wanted to
Go ahead,
ask
Said.
one specific thing. So you mentioned one opinion that was correct. Is it possible to elaborate on that? Which one was it? Just so that we,
Yeah, I mean, there are many things during COVID that talking about transmission, talking about never getting sick, natural immunity not counting, like all of the big things that were initially dismissed, or even like how the disease started, like was it was lab leak, was it in some sort of market,
yeah.
and I mean, I don't know if that was like definitively proven, but I think there's a lot more thought that it could be from a lab, which kind of makes sense. But either way, whether it's right or wrong, I mean, things were censored, right? And there was no
Yeah.
reason that you should be able to say something like, well, logically, if there's a place that's working on this virus and it happens to be that there's an outbreak right near it, that should be a logical possibility that it could have come from there. Like, you could be wrong, but
Right.
there shouldn't be something that's totally dismissed, or you're like censored or deplatformed for asking that question or investigating it. Same thing with natural immunity. Like, why you should get a jab after getting sick, when that's been the reality forever, that natural immunity works really well,
Hmm.
Right.
and you do have good protection, and anybody that did a science class knows that. Yet it was still pushed that you should still get jabs right after, which makes no sense. Like, it never made sense, and ultimately was proven that like every other virus, if you actually get it, and of course you have to not die, but assuming you don't die and you're okay after, then you have much better immunity than from a jab, which was always true.
Wow, you're bringing
Yeah.
me back to the COVID times. Like, I remember all the panic and chaos and all the controversial stuff you're talking about. And so when they said that, herd, like, we all have to get the vaccine by force in order for us to get herd immunity, or else we're all gonna die. Was that is that real, or was that what was that? Can you help unpack that a
No,
bit
it's
for
it's not
me?
real. I mean, it makes no sense. Not for a respiratory virus. I mean,
Mm,
really, for respiratory viruses in general, that's not the case. There are certain diseases where herd immunity certainly can make a difference, and certain vaccines actually can potentially get you to the point where you reach a herd immunity, so your risk of the community definitely decreases. I mean, with smallpox, we see it with measles, but a lot of the diseases you can't actually do that, or it's really impossible with the vaccines that we have. They're not meant to stop transmission, so even if you get a shot, then you still don't necessarily protect anybody, or maybe you are a little more protected, but you can still pass it on. And certainly that was the case with COVID, where I mean, we saw it that you're told you couldn't pass it on, but then you could, which is completely reasonable, because a lot of people are still carriers. Maybe you don't get sick from the disease or as sick, but you can still pass it to somebody else. We see that with
mm,
whooping cough. We see it with other like polio.
mm-hmm.
So it depends. Like, for example, the oral polio does stop transmission, but the one that we do now, the inactivated one, doesn't stop transmission. So you can still pass it on to somebody else. Whooping cough, same thing. So it's not always true that a jab can stop can create herd immunity or stop you from passing it on to somebody. Many of the shots are built to protect you in theory and minimize your risk of severe disease, but it doesn't really protect anybody else. So there is, for many of the shots, no reason you need to do it from a community perspective. It's more if you decide that you want to do it, which is why, for me, especially when it comes to things like school rules, I mean, I don't believe anybody should be forced to do anything and you should be forced to do them for school. But ultimately, for sure, you shouldn't be required to do anything that doesn't protect the other kids at the school. That doesn't make any sense. Like that should be something you're deciding for your own kid because you feel like you want the protection and you feel like the benefits outweigh the risks. So that's the way that I feel like we should be looking at these things. And I think a lot of times people don't realize that. They just think that, oh, if you don't give it for your kids, then everyone else is going to get it and you're going to be a harm to all the kids and my kid can't be around you. And that's not really true of most shots. Most shots just protect you if they do.
Wow.
Right. I mean, it does make sense. I'm thinking like from a parent's perspective, like there would be that concept of they will be thinking out of like fear and like protective instincts, that if they do give their kids the jab, and the majority would, the people who don't do it would, it does make sense for them to be saying that they would be posing a threat to the other kids, obviously, because they don't have, well, actually no, they would, if those kids have the jab, then they would be safe. But like they would be, if they got infected and they got sick within the school, is it possible for them to cause any harm to the other children or not?
So it's possible. It's just so ideally, if you get a jab, right, it's supposed to protect you, and so you shouldn't be worried about other people, right? If someone else gets sick and they bring in the school, you should be protected. That's ideal. It's still possible that you get a shot and it doesn't work well, right? So not every shot's not perfect. It's not 100% perfect. So, it doesn't work for every kid. There might be a couple kids it doesn't work for. Immunity can go down over time. So if you got a shot, 10 years ago, then maybe you're still not protected. And then there are kids that can't get certain shots for, they're newborn or maybe they have an immune deficiency of some sort. So there is some protection you can provide to other kids. But generally, if your shot works well, it should protect you and it shouldn't matter what other kids are doing. So that would be ultimately what you would like to see from shots, but it's not perfect. So there is a real argument there, but I mean, still, ultimately, mostly you should be protected if your shot's working.
Can you help me understand like the comparison between COVID and like the flu? Is it the same thing? Are there differences between the two, or are they very similar in terms of, because the flu you need to get vaccinated right annually if you choose to, and that protects you.
So I would say, coronavirus and the flu are fairly similar. Obviously, they're different viruses, different sequences, but ultimately, from your perspective as a parent, they're quite similar. I mean, it's a respiratory virus, cough, cold, runny nose, those kind of things. Some symptoms are a little different, like flu, more achiness, and obviously with coronavirus, there was like the nose and taste and smell kind of things that some people had, but ultimately most of the symptoms were pretty similar. And what makes them very similar in terms of what you're asking for in terms of the shots is that it's a respiratory virus. It mutates constantly. So any sort of jab that you might get generally is not going to work very long, if it even works at all, because it's going to change and mutate and be different. And so whatever you're protecting from is going to be different every year, which is why they offer flu shots that are different every year, because different strains would be going around. And I think that's fairly similar with coronavirus as well, that you see it change and mutate, because if you, like, for example, with the spike protein, right, you're protecting against that one protein, but ultimately, if it worked perfectly, then you would force the disease to mutate, because otherwise it can't go anywhere, nothing happens. So the only thing that would survive would find a way around through mutations, your vaccine, and then it would, the shot wouldn't work anymore. So that's what we see with these rapidly mutating viruses, where a shot becomes less and less effective over time because the disease changes to work around it, that's how it's always been for those kind of diseases.
And so COVID's here to stay, similar to the flu. We're gonna have
I mean, coronavirus. So I think that's something that people don't always know is, like, coronavirus is not new, right? Coronavirus causes 20 to 40% of colds in any given year. It was always around.
Oh, wow.
The COVID-19, theoretically was a different disease, whether it was lab engineered or whatever. It was slightly different, but still coronavirus. So coronavirus is not going anywhere. We always have colds, and that's a big part of it. It's just whether that COVID-19, that different version of it, would be still around, or how that's going to be.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think so.
A question about like other countries. Is this topic as controversial in other countries too? I mean, aside from the USA, I know you've practiced in Canada and
Yeah,
US and internationally too. So tell
I,
us a
I
bit
think
about
it
it.
is. I mean,
What's the
yeah.
difference?
I, obviously, every country is different, and how they react to things is different. But I would say a lot of countries, it's very similar. Like Canada, Europe. Certainly, it's an issue. Some countries, it's less of an issue. I think it kind of based upon how much you're forcing people to do it. That's
Mm-hmm.
where a lot of the issues lie. Because again, at the end of the day, like I'm not against vaccines. I just think that you shouldn't be forced to do it. And ultimately, if you want to have a vaccine around, that's fine, and people should be able to choose whether they want to do it or not. The issue is really mainly come in when people start being forced to do it and aren't
Mm-hmm.
explained the risks and benefits. So, I certainly you're still seeing issues, but a lot of other countries have um, minimized the recommendations. So it's really just for high risk groups at this point, almost anywhere, even in America. That's more recently changed, or certainly we're moving in that direction, which is pretty consistent with the rest of the world. So I think in terms of the usefulness, it's certainly the mass, I guess, population doesn't feel like it's super useful anymore, and most people are
Mm-hmm.
not getting it, but some people still do.
And the idea of like a vaccine passport, that was a thing for traveling and such. Is that like, to me it sounds a bit unethical because you're having to share your personal medical information with random security people around. Was that at that time necessary, or was that an overreach too?
No, I mean that's an overreach for sure. I I,
Mm-hmm.
I think that to me, ultimately, one of the big issues with COVID was that things were starting to be forced upon people
Mm-hmm.
that absolutely didn't make a lot of sense, and we don't have good protections around what is required and what is forced. Sometimes you do need to quarantine, so I think that's an unreasonable thing in extremely extreme situations, but it was never really defined, and it was way overused, and we were way over worried, especially for young healthy individuals, especially people that already had it. I think that requiring something like a passport, especially for something as I would say as mild as coronavirus. Like obviously you could get really sick, and some people did, but ultimately it's not something that's killing 9 out of 10 people.
Mm-hmm.
Like Ebola virus or something. So
Yeah.
I think you have to have some reasonable standards, and you want um, surveillance, you want public health, you want to minimize risk, but ultimately you also don't want to do it by force, I think, and you don't want to
Right.
do it by taking away people's rights. I think you want to get people to get any sort of public health measure like a shot because they want to, because
Yeah.
you've researched it and you've demonstrated that the benefits outweigh the risks, and people go and they choose, like, and I want this thing. I understand that there's this and this risk, but ultimately for me I feel like this is more beneficial, and that's why I want to do it. And
Mm-hmm.
that should be all you need to do. I mean, I don't see why you need at this point to have requirements on things when most people do it anyways. Like you have a 1% rate of unvaccinated kids or so in America, and so most people are still doing it. They don't need to be forced. There are lots of states that don't force it, and so people choose to do it. So I don't see a need to force people to do it. I mean, maybe if those rates changed and it was like 50% of people weren't doing it, that might
Mm-hmm.
change the equation and the discussion. But that's not where we are. So I don't know why we have. I mean, I know why they're doing it, because obviously they want to get as many people as possible. But I don't think you need it. That's not my position.
Mm-hmm. And whose
So
job is that to like educate the public? It seems like from the top down, everyone is becoming more skeptical of vaccines. Like RFK Jr. is the head of health, and he's very skeptical about vaccines, and all the way to doctors. Many doctors themselves are, having questions or um, so. But if everyone seems to be on the same page, then why is this such a still a huge controversial issue that um, yeah, people are afraid to talk about?
Well, I don't think everyone is on the same page. I think
Mm-hmm.
that for so long there was only one discussion that was happening, one narrative, and most people just weren't even aware of the concerns. And I think that the people that did bring them up were kind of labeled as anti-vaxxers and fringe, and that was all that it was, and culminated with people just getting completely censored and deplatformed. But I think we're now moving in a different direction where the voices are getting a little louder, and they're not being censored anymore, and people are starting to do some of their own research and look into it and start to have more questions. So I do think we're moving in that direction. So there's more than one voice and more than one story at this point, and to your question of what needs to be done, well, or who is in charge of that, well, I think it's everyone. I think it's a top down kind of approach. Like we need more transparent research done by the pharma companies. I mean, ideally it wouldn't be done by pharma companies, but that's just how it is. So I think when they're doing their research, it has to be more, we have to require them to be more transparent, which is possible. I mean, you can require them to have their data open source. You require them to make, for a new drug, a placebo control. Like there are things that you can require before you approve something. So that could be done. You have to tighten up the regulatory process around these products, and then you need to require more research to be done on things that are already on the market. So have groups like ACIP, the vaccine committee, or CDC, or whoever that's going to be looking into it. Like, okay, here are the studies that we want published. We want to get these done over the next 5 or 10 years. We want this data out there. So that's available to be disseminated to the doctors, who can then translate that to the patients. So I think it needs to be all the way down healthcare, where we need better research, more data, more information, so that way we can have this information to provide patients. It's not up to each parent, I think, to kind of do all this research, but ultimately it does need to be some pushback from parents these days to say, like, look, like, we're not comfortable with this. I want to be able to ask questions. I want this research. And I think the more that's required of the healthcare system, the more that's actually going to get done.
Yes, Said, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I wonder if this the information should also be added to like the education system itself, so that kids, as they grow up, they learn about this. Yes, their parents are making decisions for them, but if they learn about the jab and what are the different effects of it, all of these discussion points as they're growing up, once they do become adults and then eventually parents, they will already have some basic information, or at least the foundations of that information within them. Then that when they start learning by themselves, or do independent research, they have an awareness.
Yeah,
I mean, too much?
Well, you'd have to think, like, who's going to be educating and where are they going to be educating for kids. So, I mean, to me, we don't even educate doctors. We don't really learn about it. So I would start there. I think doctors need a lot more education in jabs, and I think there needs to be some courses on safety and ingredients and discussions. And like, I make a joke in the book, like, pretty early on, like, doctors don't get a course on, like, why not to trust pharma 101. But, like, I think we need that. Like, I think we need go back to a time where we're like, okay, like, it's not that everyone's evil, but, like, here are the kind of things that pharma does. Like, we're responsible for keeping them in check. And you shouldn't just trust everything that they do. Here's kind of the background of where we are today. Here's the background on jabs. Here's the liability that we have for them. Like, I think it's important to understand that kind of what's going on and what's the historical perspective on that, so that way we can kind of move forward. I think from a kid's perspective, I don't know that you could dive too far into these kind of things for young kids, because it would be probably over their heads. But I do think that just goes back to, like, education and kind of what we're teaching them. And I think going back to maybe not just including math and science and reading, but more about critical thinking and more about life skills and cooking and nature. And so where that could come in is just more around, like, critical thinking and questioning and asking questions. Like, that kind of stuff could be very useful. But I don't know how much, like, you want to teach a 4-year-old or 10-year-old about, like, vaccine science. Like, I might be. I don't know. You know what I mean? So I would focus more on the critical thinking aspect, and then later they can maybe learn a little bit about it.
Good point.
I think maybe one thing that is important to teach, kids and adults in general, is just don't be naive. Like teach them about the realistic thought points. Like that there is groups out there that are seeking, to make a profit off of you, and they're not actually seeking the best outcome for you as a client or a patient or whatever. And this maybe it's a bit of a tough concept to teach kids, but I don't know, maybe there's some way to, like, disseminate it into.
I think you could, certainly older kids, like high school. I mean, you can go through some historical examples of where we were marketed to, and where things changed, and how there were recommendations at certain times that are so different now, and where there were big lawsuits. And you can talk about like different things that through history, so they can have an understanding of how just because you're taught something today doesn't necessarily mean it's correct in the future, or maybe things are biased based on who's
Yeah,
fun. Like
case
you
studies.
could teach some of that, and I think that would be very useful, not as to be specific, but just more around, again, like critical thinking and just understanding that just because you're told something in a commercial, like who's making that commercial? Why are they talking about it? Like, oh, you're watching this on Netflix, like you saw the beer in there, like, well, how did that beer get there? Like, how did that bag of chips get there? Like, okay, they paid for that, like I think people don't always
Right.
realize that like it's not necessarily like the actors like this thing, they're being paid for it, and we don't get taught any of that. You're just like, oh,
Hmm.
I saw this famous celebrity talking about this brand on their Instagram. Well, they don't realize they were paid for that. Like, I think you need to teach people that.
Yes,
No,
medical
I
advertising is
definitely.
specifically a U.S. issue, an American issue, where you watch any
Yeah.
TV, you're on Hulu, and then you just see some Pfizer ads for random, shots, or I guess now the um, like Wegovy and all
Yeah, the
the
weight loss
weight
drugs,
loss
they're
drugs. That's
everywhere.
what's okay. What are your thoughts about like medical advertisement, um, and concerning the jabs, and then also, yeah, concerning other things like weight loss drugs too?
Yeah, I mean, so I grew up in Canada, and
Hmm.
one of the first things that was very apparent, like very oddly apparent, when you move to the States, is everything is an ad for pharma. It's crazy. Like it's just, you don't realize it when you're here, but you do
Yeah.
realize it if it's anywhere else. Where like you just don't see it anywhere else, and here it's like every other ad, maybe every like 3 out of 4 ads are something for pharma, some new product. Ask your doctor, and I am not a fan of that because I'm not against advertising, but the problem is because pharma is so big and because there's so much of the ad spending, they kind of own everything,
Hmm.
and they're
Mm.
so they're such a important part of all these platforms and the news and all these other modalities that you basically have them funding those platforms, and then it's really hard to question anything on them. It's really easy, if a newscaster is like, oh, let's do a report on this thing, then the farmer's like, no, 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 don't do that. Like, that person's gone if they're asking questions. So I think it's a big problem because you're getting um, them to kind of fund everything, and so we just don't realize how much of an influence they actually have over the news and media and the medical journals and
Hmm.
medical schools and everything. So that's where I think the problem is, not so much the actual ad, as it is that they kind of are behind the scenes and the partner of,
Wow.
of every kind of
I never
uh,
thought about that. How
modality.
much money they're putting into just media in general, aside from just the ads too. Wow.
Right. So
Hmm.
I think it's much less, and multiple people have said this now, that it's much less about them trying to promote their drug and making you think. Obviously, like any ad, it's like, you think about it, you might want to go get it, but mostly it's more so that they can buy the platform. Like they kind of own it because they're funding it, and if you say something bad about them, then they could pull their funding. So you're much more hesitant to say something
Wow.
bad about their company on the news, I think.
Wow. I'm a bit mind blown right now. Okay, just a quick thing about the weight loss drugs. Are they miracle drugs that help people lose weight, and are we gonna have shots that help us build muscles? And is it like actually like a beautiful thing that people can get healthy with weight loss drugs, or is it still like not safe for people?
I mean, it's interesting because they do seem to work really well for weight
Hmm.
loss. So I think that they have a place, and most medicines have a place. I'm not against medications. I just think it should be a last resort in general, and you use things when you need to. And these drugs, they do seem to be helpful, but it's something you need to take, basically forever. And
Mm.
everything, nothing is that magical, right? Everything has a cost to it, and the more long term data that we're having, the more problems that we're starting to see. And so I think that there are some major risks. Certainly, we've seen eye issues and liver issues and
Yeah.
gastrointestinal issues. So they come with their risks, and obviously everyone's different. So it's not necessarily going to be a huge issue or side effect for you. But you can't just willy nilly take a shot every day and not assume it's not going to have patients. So I think that we're at a place where we're using a medication to solve a problem that we're not solving the problem for why it's there in the first place. So we have this obesity epidemic, we have a food problem, we have an exercise problem, and then we're just saying, take a shot and that'll cure all your issues, but it doesn't get to the underlying issues that you're having or the system in general. So does it have a place?
Mm.
Yeah, I do think it has a place. I think for somebody who's morbidly obese, very ill, not able to get in a positive direction, then it could be something that might help you in the short term. to get you going in a better direction, to be like, all right, let's get some wins, let's decrease the amount that you're eating, and then maybe you start feeling a little better so you can exercise a little bit more and you eat a little bit healthier. And to me, if you're for somebody who's very very severely ill or very morbidly obese, has lots of complications, is getting near to death basically, or very serious, then maybe that's the thing that can push you back in a better direction and get the ball rolling. But it can't be in isolation. I think you have to have the plan that you're going to use this for a few months or a year or whatever it is, and work towards getting better habits, and maybe that could be the thing that helps you get there. So that to me is the scenario where I could see it being very useful, versus the person who just wants to lose a couple of pounds, or the teen who's overweight, who who is just eating a bunch of crap and doesn't want to do the work. Like that to me isn't solving the problems. It might move you in a better direction, but ultimately the question is, like, why is everyone overweight and obese? Like, that's what we have to fix.
I mean, I kind of want to disagree on this point, because I mean, you see a lot of cases of people who are morbidly obese and they're not losing weight because it's probably just when you're like 500 pounds, you can lose weight by just reducing how much you're eating. Like if you just take out one meal, literally just one meal out of your usual lifestyle, you're already reducing the amount of calories you're intaking per day. I mean, is it that tough to like just reduce by a little bit, by that much?
I mean, for
Because
some people it is, right? So and I'm not disagreeing with you that shouldn't be the way that it should be done. I mean, I think it would be obviously ideal if somebody could get motivated, start exercising, eating more healthy, but they're not. And sometimes a medication can be a quick fix, and that could move someone in the right direction. So I think what you're saying is that's not the optimal way to go about it. I agree. I don't think it is, but
no, because like to add to so you were saying like it's not solving the issue at hand, because the issue at hand is definitely something else, which is addiction. Because at that point you're just addicted to eating. Whether it's as a coping mechanism or your lifestyle is like that, you're just addicted to eating, which that's the actual issue. And I think maybe a lot of people are not aware of it, that they're addicted to either eating junk food, or just eating a lot of food throughout the day. And that's like the main issue at that point, is it not?
no, I agree. Again, I think
and,
we're
and
totally in agreement
sorry,
on
sorry,
that.
I'm interrupting, but I just wanted to add to the point about like if you're taking the medication, you're losing the weight, fine, but the addiction is still there. That's the point that I wanted to make. The
No,
addiction is still
but
there.
again, I totally agree with you, but I think from a practical perspective, from a reality, realistic perspective, it's
Yeah.
nice to say like, oh, well, someone should just eat less, or they have an addiction. But sometimes when you're in that place, in that state, just getting moving, just starting, they have an inertia that's really hard to break. And something like a medication could be that thing. It could be one option, one thing in a tool belt for a practitioner to use to get them moving in a better direction. And you're right, it doesn't change the underlying addiction, but it might move them in a better direction to start to be more willing to go to a therapist, to start willing to be going
Mm,
to exercise. Like you can prescribe as a physician all you want, nutrition counseling, or psychology, or exercise, but it doesn't mean someone's going to do it. And it's much easier to take a medication than to go to a gym every single day. So yeah, it's better if you could just tell someone to do that and they go do it. But if they're not and they're about to die, then maybe this is the thing that can turn them around and get them to start having some wins and start to lose some weight, and then they're more motivated to go. So that to me is my position on it. I
yeah.
don't think we disagree at all, that it's not
Yeah.
optimal, and that there aren't side effects, and that it's not the right way to do things, and we shouldn't be needing that. But we are at a place where we do need to do something, and
Right.
this is something else in the tool belt. But again, I think it should be last. Like, I don't think you should be going to the prescriber for the first time and they're like, oh, well, the thing you should do is take a medication. No, like, you should be like, well, have you can we prescribe exercise? Can I prescribe a nutritionist? Can you work with somebody? Like, I think those things should be done first. And if they still
Right.
fail and they're still going in the wrong direction, then that could be something that's used in those scenarios. I don't think it should ever have to be used, but I do think that if you live in the real world, then sometimes you do need a quick fix for some people. They're just not making those changes.
Yeah,
Your
that's a fair
job
point.
sounds impossible, not gonna lie, because you're advocating for the health of people, but it's not always that people want to be super healthy or want what's best for them. Like, we know cigarettes are bad, but people still smoke them, or the same thing with junk food. And like you can advocate for people to have a healthy lifestyle, but they still will make the decisions individually. Like, I don't care about being the healthiest I can. I want to have my vices and live my life, you know? And similar
Yeah.
to the vaccine situation too, it's like some parents might even say, yeah, I don't want to give my kid any, zero. I'm sure there's tons of negative effects for that. And for the last topic of today's discussion, I want to talk about the side effects. So, um, what are the side effects of not taking any jabs whatsoever?
I mean, what like I don't know exactly. So I mean, the side effects of not taking it. I mean, there's
Yeah.
no side effects of not doing something. I mean, the effects would be you don't have the theoretical protection
Mm,
that the jab would give you from whatever disease if you were exposed to it. So I mean, you wouldn't have any side effects, but you could be unprotected from something which you could potentially be someone who gets that and then you get sick, and maybe the protection from the jab would have helped you from getting super sick. So most of these diseases are super rare. Most of the time when you get them, the effects are mild. So yeah, like measles, polio, a lot of these things are mild
mm-hmm.
symptoms. But if you happen to be the one kid that gets super sick, it's possible. Like whooping cough, it's not fun for most people, but they're okay. But if a baby gets it, they could get super sick. Half kids go to the hospital. So,
Mm.
if a jab works and protects you, then it would decrease your risk of those serious complications. So that's the side effect, is you don't have that protection. But ultimately, obviously, there's no side effects from not doing
I
something.
guess, yeah, that's a good point. And then, okay, so we've interviewed people on the pod who have had major side effects to vaccines, the jabs, and the COVID jab specifically. And like we had this one person on who lost his ability to walk, and he had long haul COVID or sorry, vax side effects, and so. And there's a lot of people that are going through the same thing. He was working with a group of people to try to get some accountability for it, but I don't think he ever reached anywhere. Is there any accountability for people that are getting? Have you seen people that have gotten injured from the jabs, and what what has the jab manufacturers done to help these people out?
Yeah, it's one of the biggest issues I think in the jab world is liability just isn't really there. So
Mm-hmm.
there is a compensation program. You can basically see the government, and potentially if one of the complications you have is under the limited scope of the things that they kind of determine are possible from jabs, then you can maybe get some compensation from that. Not too much, but some. But generally, if you have a reaction, it's kind of labeled as a coincidence, and
Wow.
and then you don't. There's nothing really that you can do. So, but mostly they have immunity. You can't really sue the companies, which is a big, I think, issue in terms of safety that we have at the moment, and that there's not really a lot of accountability to these companies if their products cause a problem. And there's nobody really forcing them to make them better because there's no reason to, because they don't have the liability. So I think ultimately, yeah, it's a big problem.
Damn. Well, I mean,
No justice for our friends. Yeah, exactly. I got hurt. Yeah, from the jab.
it is really unfortunate that they find ways or loopholes to avoid getting reprimanded or getting served justice, whatever way they do it. Um, Hopefully, I mean, in the future, there is ways. I, what advice would you give these kind of people who have been affected by jabs in general? Like, how what's the best way for them to actually try to seek justice or get some compensation, or what would
Yeah, I
help?
mean, compensation is hard because they have immunity. So the way
Yeah.
that I think in terms of, I guess, I mean, I don't know if you're going to get full justice, but ultimately, if for those people that have been injured, then I think it's being loud and speaking up and making sure that people are aware and understand, and working and continuing to work towards changing the rules,
Okay.
and seeking the research and the evidence that's needed to kind of bring the points more to light and to understand the full scope of what's going on. I mean, I think we need changes from a legislative level in terms of liability, but then also I think we need the studies to be done. to look into long-term complications. So that way some of these things can be noted to actually be caused or associated with jabs. And that's what's really tough at the moment is there isn't really a lot of, or almost none, there's no vax versus unvax studies. There's no prospective trials. We're not following people forward for 5 or 10 years. So any sort of chronic conditions that you might feel like happened to you from a jab, there's no way to prove that really unless you study it, or it's really hard to prove it through modern means. So I think ultimately pushing and discussing and stating that this is happening and making sure that happens in the future and the research occurs, that's what really is going to change things and hold these companies liable if the products are causing an issue.
Wow.
Awesome. Well, Dr. Joel, thank you so much.
I have one last question. About autism. Autism is listed as the original Andrew Wakefield study was tie vaccines to autism, and that's what started this major anti-vax movement. So just to tie it all together, are autism rates really rising, or are we just better at diagnosing it?
No, they're really rising. It's both. I think that we absolutely are better at diagnosing it. We're much more aware of it. We're discussing it a lot more. If you want to get services, then you get an autism diagnosis, and that helps you to get those services. So there are many reasons for there to be more autism diagnoses, but there's also just way more autism than there was when we were little. And I think the easiest example of that, where kind of the ridiculous kind of notion that it's just better diagnosis is thrown out the water when you look at the adults today. And there aren't 1 in 30, adults with autism, and in California it's 1 in 12.5 boys now with autism, and there aren't 1 in 12 adult males in California with autism. It's ridiculous. So there's a lot more for sure, and there's a lot more severe autism for sure than there used to be. I would imagine that the majority of the cases of autism that were undiagnosed in the past were, I would say, like more mild autism, individuals that could function. But maybe just have some things that kind of put them on the lower end of the scale in terms of still being able to function, able to communicate, but just maybe having some other issues or difficulties. Whereas a good chunk of what we're seeing today, like 20-30%, is very severe autism, unable to function, communicate, self-harm. We did not see nearly as much of that in the past. It was labeled as other things sometimes, for sure, but still, it's still way more.
Wow. Do you know why? I know this is the most impossible question, but
no, we don't.
An idea?
No, that's unfortunate, right? Is that we don't know. We really have no idea what's going on. Not there are certainly theories, but we just have no idea, since it was never really studied appropriately, and that's unfortunate, because if we had been studying it appropriately for the last 10 years, we'd have more thoughts. But I would say ultimately it's probably our crappy food mixed with chemicals and toxins, and I think that's a big part of it. Genetics is certainly a part of it, but I think it's genetics plus our environment that's pushing people over the edge. And so I think that those are the things we should be focused, and that's what's happening now. We're asking those questions now, but we don't have the data. We haven't been studying it in the proper way to really figure it out.
Well, thank you, Dr. Gator. Everyone go see your doctor once a year, get your labs checked, and seek getting healthier. Saeed?
Dr. Joel, thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing all of your insights and information. We'll definitely be sharing your book and your website with our audience and everyone who's watching this. Are there any final words you'd like to share, maybe words of advice you'd like to share to the audience before we sign out?
Yeah, just thank you for having me on. Thank you for having these discussions. I think for parents, the reality is you're not woo-woo or crazy for asking questions about jabs or anything else. And I think if you're going to do anything for your kids, especially, injecting a bunch of things into them, you should be okay to ask questions, and you should never go to a provider that's unwilling to have discussions, at least with you. And I think that you shouldn't feel like you're the only person out there who has questions. I think a lot of parents do, and more parents do. So I think if we keep asking questions, the system will actually change, and we'll get more answers, because it does take everybody kind of stepping up and asking questions and pushing back a little bit for the system to change. So I think it's a good thing that people are doing that.
Awesome. And guys, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. And we'll see you in the next one.
We're out. Guys. Woo. Ciao. Thank you.